Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be ranking the recent handful of palettes that have been added to my eyeshadow palette collection. I try to keep my collection pretty curated. I did bring a couple of palettes in rather recently, but then before that my most recent purchases take me all the way back to Black Friday. It's only a handful of palettes because again, on a low buy, no buy all the time, trying to only bring in that which I think I'm really gonna love or things that have been given to me. So let's dive into these eyeshadow palettes because you know what? They're just so much fun to look at and talk about. If you're curious about today's look, it was filmed and I will link it below in the description box as well as card above here for you. I did this eyeshadow at about 6:30 this morning. It's currently 10:40 at night, so it's looking a little bit worse for wear, but honestly, I think it's held up quite well. This is the brand new, no, it's not brand new. It's brand new to me, the Winter Wonderland palette from Cosmic Brushes or Cosmic Beauty. It was a surprise. Somebody sent it to me, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like a couple of these palettes most of these palettes I did by myself, but one or two were given to me. And so as much as I am very careful to only bring in something that I think I'm really going to enjoy, sometimes there's just a delightful surprise waiting in my mailbox because I have wonderful subscribers and wonderful friends, and I'm just feeling loved. Anyway, if you're curious about today's eyeshadow look, do remember to check that carded video or the description box. It is live and it is there. So let's just dive right in. I have eight palettes to rank in today's video. Like I said in the beginning, a couple of these I have brought in more recently within the last 2 months or so, but then a few of them go all the way back to Black Friday sales from last year because I bring in palettes pretty slowly. Let's start off with palette number 8. It's gonna have to go to the Nomad America Sparks palette. This is a palette that was given to me quite unexpectedly by one of my kind subscribers. Honestly, it's a nice palette. I don't have anything to complain about with this palette. More than anything else, I think it's a matter of color story. I tend to prefer colorful eyeshadow. I just love vibrant, bright colors. Sometimes I do want to go more neutral, and I have some more neutral leaning palettes in my collection. This one is a bit of both. I don't know, it's more neutral tones or neutral leaning colorful tones, like this yellow. It's not a lemon, it's sort of a dirty mustard yellow. This green, it's not a lime or a bright green. It's kind of grassy with a hint of brown. So everything, even the colorful even the colorful shades in this palette do still lean a little bit more quiet and muted, a bit more neutral. They work beautifully with the neutrals that are here. This is one of Nomad's older palettes. It is discontinued and they have definitely improved their shimmer formula. I haven't had any problems with this palette, but I do know that their more recent palettes are a better formula overall, especially in the shimmers, but probably the mattes too, honestly. Again, I don't have any problems with it. It's just not a color story that really excites me. And that's the case for most neutral palettes. Like, I don't buy a neutral palette because I'm excited about it. I buy it because I feel that there's a gap in my collection, or it has certain tones and colors of neutrals that I don't have and I want, or maybe a certain combination, like the color story put together, these tones and these shimmers and depth and everything all put together in one happy little spot. That's why I would bring in a neutral palette. So neutral palettes by default can't rank very high in my rankings unless they're truly spectacular. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Ace Beauté Envy palette. It surprised me that this one has landed, we're in spot number 7, lower. It surprised me that it's landed lower because I was pining after this palette for a year, however long it's been since it was released, and I brought this in secondhand a couple of months ago, several months ago. Getting it in the mail, I was so excited because I am incredibly drawn to this kind of color story, blues and greens with the yellow and the brown. There's just something about this that speaks to me. So I'm surprised that it's landing lower, especially compared to some of the palettes in here that are totally different from this. I think with this palette, there are two things. Honestly, it's a beautiful formula. It's a beautiful color story. I do wish that it had some lighter mattes because these two are well, actually these three, they're all very similar. These two especially, one's a bit more navy blue, one's a bit more brown. They're certainly different. There are different undertones in these pans, but the colors, and especially the depths, very similar. I wish that this palette had a lighter green matte, one pastel or lighter green blue, and then one pastel somewhere. That would have rounded it off a little bit more, given me the full complement of depths from light to dark and everything in between. I also wish that it didn't have such deep shimmers because I personally prefer a mid to light tone shimmer. I almost never use a dark shimmer. I mean, I do. Like today I have a dark purple right here, but it's really just bridging the gap between the light shimmer and the dark matte. That's my standard eyeshadow aesthetic. So dark shimmers I usually use just for that small space, or if I'm doing something deep and smoky, then I might cover my lid in a dark shimmer. But on the whole, I do wish this palette had a little bit more in the way of light tones. It is beautiful. And the other reason is that it's just so pigmented. It's great quality. But I really need to be in the mood for this, because this is what I'm going to get. There's very little nuance to this palette. It's so in your face. Here's what you're going to get without a lot of softness. So if I want like these colors but a little bit softer, I have to go into a different palette. The colors are very buildable, but because they're so intense, they're so deep. It's kind of like the Age of Opulence palette from Beauty Bay. It's just like pigment crazy. So you're gonna get a very, very pigmented look, and you have to want that going in, or you might be a little frustrated or disappointed. In spot number 6, I've got the In Memory Bundle from Sydney Grace. I really struggle with Sydney Grace. Honestly, I think the formula is amazing. Really great. The mattes are some of the best I've ever worked with, possibly the best that I've ever worked with. It's the shimmers of Sydney Grace, and it's the packaging. The shimmers are beautiful. They're really, really beautiful, but they're very creamy, very buttery. Simply, my shimmer aesthetic is more light and sparkly. That's just what I like. So I enjoy playing with the Sydney Grace mattes, but then I always want, like, when I put a shimmer on, I almost always dress it up with a different sparkly topper shade, just to give it a bit more oomph. You know what I mean? They have an amazing formula. They really do. It's just preference as far as the final finish. You know, I want a little bit more sparkle and less creamy butter. Now, I think the Sydney Grace formula is excellent for aging skin, more mature eyelids that maybe have more creases and wrinkles, the fine lines are showing up. Then the Sydney Grace formula really shines because it's not highlighting texture and bumps and creases and valleys. It's a smoother formula. So maybe as I get older, I'll enjoy this more, or I'll reach for Sydney Grace more. And then I did mention packaging. The Sydney Grace packaging, it really leaves a lot to be desired to what I enjoy. I mean, I'm loving the creativity of the indie brands, and Sydney Grace packaging is a lot more subdued. I also find that there's not much cohesion across the brand. Like when I see Udeni packaging, I know, okay, that's Udeni, because there's just their vibe. They figured out their personality, and they're running with it. And I don't get that from Sydney Grace. I don't know, they're just little things. But as far as the eyeshadow, it's really amazing eyeshadow. This palette has to rank a little bit lower though for those reasons, and also because the colors on the whole though, I think they tend to lean a little bit grungy, just dipping their toes in the grungy pool. Not all of them, but some of the ones in this palette. And I find that when I use these colors, they don't pop on my skin as much as I hoped that they would. I don't know, I think maybe I need more pure undertones or more jewel tone leaning or soft cool leaning as opposed to warmer dirtier leaning undertones. It's a very subtle difference. I do like the shades in this palette. I do enjoy using them. I just haven't yet gotten to the point where I'm excited about them. I feel bad saying that because I bought this new off the Sydney Grace website. It was not secondhand. I know the story behind the In Memory Bundle with Mel Thompson and everything. This is nothing to disparage, of course, the brand or the collaboration or the website or anything like that. It's just where it's landing. It's personal preference. I feel like I talked way too long about that palette. Let's get moving. In spot number 5, I have the Stone and Rock palette from Udeni, and this palette, this is kind of like the Sydney Grace, only with slightly better undertones. These are a little bit brighter. Again, on the whole, a couple of them are obviously more grungy, dirty, a little bit more swampy, but, and here's the big thing, the shimmers are brighter, more clean kinds of undertones, and they're the sparkly formula that I love. So when I want those kinds of colors, I always end up reaching for this palette because I'm going to get those colors with a more flattering lean, and I'm going to get a formula, especially in shimmers, that I prefer. I think that's what it is. That's the best that I can come up with as far as explanation. This palette glows a little bit more. It stands out on my skin a little bit more. I think that these undertones are more flattering on me, and I love the Udeni formula overall for shimmers and mattes. Also, this palette has a white matte over here, and it's got basically a black. The In Memory Bundle doesn't have quite as much range. It does have light to depth, but doesn't go as light and doesn't go as dark. So there you go. Now we're going to talk about the Ace Beauté Aura palette, the sister palette to the Envy. I bought them together, again, secondhand. They are the Cosmic Collection, which I think is still available, but limited edition. I was surprised where this one ranked as well, because really I thought color story wise I would put Envy above Aura any day. In fact, I wasn't even interested in buying it. I just got it because it came in the bundle that I picked up. But this palette consistently surprises me. Every time I wear this palette, I get a beautiful look, and the purples look great with my eye color and my, again, skin undertones. I have like cool blue leaning undertones, I think. By the way, side note, undertones in our skin is a subject which is getting deeper and deeper the more I look into it. I have never gone to some professional place and had them tell me exactly what my undertones are. Neutral, cool, warm, blue, green, yellow, golden, whatever. I've never done that. I kind of feel like I ought to, but based on my personal experience, the colors that I look good in, the whole wrist test, which someone recently told me is not exactly as accurate as people used to think it was, all of that tell me that I have kind of cool leaning blue undertones, but I haven't had it professionally done. So anyway, back to the palette. This palette, like these colors look great on me. They look really nice with my skin, with my eye color. They pop, they look great with my hair color. And every time I use the palette, it's got enough variety, it's got enough different sorts of shades and tones and depths that I get a beautiful look. Again, with the contrast, we have one pretty light shimmer here, and none of these shimmers are super dark. I will say I almost never use a bright gold shimmer, and I have found that to be the case across the board. This one up here is actually kind of shifty. It's like a pink, purple, peachy, again, champagne sort of shift. Pretty, but this palette has to rank where it is because I always get a really beautiful look. It does have some variety in neutrals. The shimmers are more to my taste as far as the color and the depth of them, and these colors look fabulous on my eyes. Okay, now we're getting to the top three. Let's talk about some pastels. We have the Garden of Juvia's palette given to me by a subscriber, and really I think this palette's great. I absolutely love the shimmer formula in here. This is nothing like the previous Juvia's Place palettes that I'd tried in the past. I'm assuming they've reformulated. They just improved the shimmer formula. It is so much better in here than it is in all of the other ones I had. Maybe it's age. If they haven't changed the formula, it would have to be age because the palettes that I had before were older. But I think they changed the formula because they don't even look the same in the pan. Never mind performing the same. This is my shimmer formula along with Udeni favorite. They're light, they're lightweight. They don't look heavy. They don't look visually burdened. They're not slimy or oily. They are crisp and clean, very, very sparkly, but not glittery. They just feel kind of airy, fairy-like ethereal. I just love that shimmer formula. And it doesn't matter so much what the color is because I get that formula from Udeni with even darker shimmer colors, but still that same formula, and I love it. This palette was my favorite pastel palette until it's recently been dethroned, but honestly it's still wonderful. And I actually moved this down to spot number 3. I'll tell you why in a minute, but my complaints with this palette are minor. I wish that this were a lemon yellow instead of like a bright marigold, because I think lemon yellow would have worked better with the other tones. I think we have a little bit too much repetition in this palette with the 5 purples that are all pretty similar, honestly, and then 2 shimmer greens that are quite close. I think that especially because we have a blue shimmer, we should have had a blue matte and one of these purples maybe a darker blue. Those are my thoughts. I can pick it apart a bit, but honestly it's a great palette and I really, really, really enjoy this formulation. I think that their newer things like the Candy Shop and the Culture palettes, I think they also have this nicer formulation based on what I've seen and what people have been saying. In spot number 2, we have Jewels and Gem, also from Udeni, launched with the Stone and Rock as part of their Yours Divine collection. Probably the 2 most neutral palettes that Udeni has ever put out. I had this and Garden of Juvia switched, so this was in number 3, and I bumped it to number 2 because this palette constantly surprises me. There's something so attractive about these tones and the values of them. The undertones of this palette work really well on me. I love the looks. I'm always delighted with the final result, especially when I use this shade, I go, wow, that's so pretty. It doesn't look quite in the pan the way that it looks on my eyes. And I just think it's beautiful. It's got a nice variety of depth, again, lightness and depth, a light shimmer, which I like. Actually, all light shimmers. There are no really dark shimmers in here. We can get some more neutral tones or you can go more colorful, but it's very subtle. It reminds me of the ColourPop Lust for Dusk palette. It reminds me of the Cosmic Beauty Muse palette. We've got these romantic florals. That's what this palette reminds me of. It's not really jewel tones. I know the palette's jewels and gems, but they're not jewel tones. They're just more quiet and elegant, less poppy and bright and vibrant. The shimmers in here, like the color selection, they're so feminine and flattering. It's beautiful, honestly, and every time I use it, I don't use it enough. Every time I use it, I love the final result. It's not super showy, but it's sophisticated and it's elegant and it looks classy. And finally, in spot number 1 of these 8 most recently added to my collection eyeshadow palettes is the Sickly Sweet from Blend Bunny. This is now my favorite pastel palette. The Blend Bunny formula, the matte formula, it's truly amazing. For performance, in my experience and in my opinion, kind of a cross between udeni and Sydney Grace. Not for quality. I love all of them. Honestly, they're like some of my top favorite matte formulas, period. Udeni mattes will stick where you put them and you just work out the edges, just buff along the edge. The Sydney Grace mattes, they move around a little bit more. They're extraordinarily easy to blend. I mean, if you have a harsh line, you just bump, bump, and it's gone. These are somewhere in the middle, but just as good. These pastels are surprisingly pigmented because pastels are hard to formulate. There's a lot of white in their base, and that can be tricky. It can end up looking very dusty or very chalky on people. I will say within this palette, we've got a little bit of, not repetition, but some shades that are kind of close to others, like these right here, these right here, these, I think we could have done a bit better. But what I really love about this palette, besides the formula itself, and by the way, these shimmers are my favorite. They are light, they are lightweight, they are sparkly and glittery without being glitter. So beautiful, so much fun. They're easy to work with, they pick up with a brush, they pick up with a finger. This palette though also offers something which most pastel palettes don't, and that of course is dark tones. Now I have to say, and I said in a previous video, you can't do a pastel palette and throw in a black. That's not going to work because black mixed with the white base of the pastels is just going to give you gray, and now everything is washed out and chalky and dusty and kind of like, well, not very great. What you need to do to deepen a pastel is bring in a dark color. So all of the deepest mattes in this palette are just dark colors of the pastels. There are a few midtones as well to bridge the gap, and the midtones, while used sparingly, do indeed work to connect the lightness of the pastel colors with the depth of the dark colors. It's a great palette, honestly, and it is my favorite from the Blend Bunny brand. I know that they got some flack for mixing their colors up, but I actually prefer this. In fact, I have found over time that a gradient palette doesn't inspire me because it's too orderly. It doesn't make me feel creative. It doesn't put two colors next to each other that challenge me. So I really prefer this layout for all my palettes. And while I think that Blend Bunny might have made their way a little bit harder by moving away from the gradient format, I don't dislike it because they have a wonderful formula, and I think that for my own preferences, a more, as people have been calling it, chaotic layout is just a whole lot more fun. So there you go, guys. Those are my 8 most recent eyeshadow palette additions to my collection. I have a few more that I'm currently working through, or testing out, we'll say, but these ones I felt that I had used enough to really give them a proper ranking. And I'm actually proud of myself because when I am on a low or no buy, I really do try to honor that and not let this collection take over or encourage me to make unwise financial decisions when we have other goals in mind. So thank you so much for being here today. I hope that you will consider liking and subscribing if you haven't done so before. I do tend to upload multiple videos every week. I should have mentioned in the beginning that I will have all of these palettes, if they're still available, linked below in the description box, so check there for lots of information as well as today's look and other things. I appreciate your time and hope to see you guys again in my next video. Bye.